Okay, we're starting in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Feminism and Religion Fair School podcast. I'm Hannah Bobic, and today I'm talking to a brilliant theologian of enviable intellectual equity. Regina Amicht Quinn is a theologian and a senior professor at the University of Tübingen, specializing in theological ethics. Her research focuses on fundamental questions of ethics, responsibility, relationality, binary and dualistic thinking, discourses of autonomy and relationality, and dissatisfaction, as well as questions of ethics in practice, ethics of cultures, human rights, political ethics, ethics of gender discourse, politics and care, security, ethics of digital technologies, of digital life, ethics and dual use, ethics of religion, body, sexuality, shame, ethics of religions, cultures, religious freedoms, fundamentalism, and democracies. Regina, welcome.
Thank you. That was quite shameful here.
Why?
Oh, I don't know. That might be a woman's thing too. To be shamed by people talking to oneself like you did now.
Well, it's all true, so I don't think there is a place for shame, but you are true that is kind of thing with the culture that we women are brought in and how we're raised and etc. But we will leave that for a bit later. I will start with something that I see as fundamental to all your work and as a great frame for understanding your work, which is so diverse, as we just heard. So if I do understand correctly, you understand human vulnerability as the source of human dignity.
Yes, yes, and of course, there's quite a lot of literature and discourse on vulnerability, and most of it understands vulnerability as a special state or condition somebody has or finds themselves in. The very young and the very old, and the poor and the foreigner are deemed as vulnerable. And of course, this is right, but I think it goes beyond this. And if I may, I tell you a story because um, I have a very favorite episode in George Orwell's memoir, looking back at the Spanish War. And this is this Orwell, as a soldier, describes how he's lying in a trench outside a camp of fascist soldiers and waits for them to come out of the camp. And finally, one of them turns up, half dressed. He's running, likely to what counted as toilet, and holds up his pants um, so they won't slip down. And then Orwell writes, somebody who holds up his pants is no fascist, but a human similar to yourself, and you don't feel like shooting at him. And I find this wonderful because this German or Spanish fascist soldier might be in a state, but this state is something every human knows. It's an undignified, a shameful moment. And this moment reminds Orwell that he's human. And to connect this undignified moment to dignity is somewhat complicated because we have a history where dignity has been ascribed not to everybody, but to a certain people, to white people, to Christian people, people with some kind of possessions or property, to men, And they were the real people with dignity. And we are still in this learning process, in this unfinished learning process, to see that there's dignity to other races and religions and social classes and gender and so on. And this is unfinished because, of course, we see in right-wing movements and right-wing parties talk and actions that they don't ascribe dignity, for example, to immigrants, but also not to gay and lesbian and queer, and especially not to trans people. And so I think we all need to insist that those who are seen as others are dignified human beings because they are vulnerable, like we are. And maybe just let me add one religious thought. Jewish and Christian people believe they are made in the likeness of God. And so this sounds somewhat fancy. So we could maybe translate this humankind is a spitting image of God. And this is often seen as the religious basis of dignity. And in one midrash, one Jewish interpretation of the holy text, which is very old, like 5th or 6th century, it says, God and the human are like twins. If one has a headache, the other feels it. And I think our headache should be there is no dignity at all if it's not seen in everybody. And maybe first and foremost, and the most vulnerable people.
Listening to you inspired me to come up with, well, let's say, a bit of a copyright, a very short emphasis of what you say. I want to ask you if I did understand correct. If I did, when you were talking, in my mind, there was this thought about, like, this makes sense. If we remove vulnerability from human dignity, then we don't have human dignity, we have privilege.
We have privilege, and we have an image of the human who's not vulnerable, who's not made out of flesh, but out of whatever, stone and steel, and we don't want to have those people.
You have been in Croatia, you have collaborated with University in Rijeka in a few occasions, and I have interviewed you on one occasion, and we grasped the question of relational autonomy. I also find this to be somehow connected with the question of human vulnerability and human dignity. And you said then that we cannot leave the question of autonomy to a sexist type of philosophy. What does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah, well, sexist. You hit the nail on the head. And um, let let me start out with this. Autonomy is important. Autonomy as thinking and acting for oneself is central to a life in liberty. It's important that we can choose whom to love and live with, what to wear, what to study, for which party to vote, and so on, much more. And we also see that people who need support and care for their daily life still must be supported in their autonomy. And Also, women in difficult life situations need the freedom to decide about pregnancy and birth and decide whether they are able to give birth to a new human into this world. Um, uh, because who else should have this autonomy? Her father, or the baby's father, or a judge, or a priest? So, without autonomy, without the idea of autonomy, we couldn't even ask this question. But, and there's a bit but, we live in traditional and patriarchal philosophical tradition that gave and gives us an inflated idea of human autonomy. A human being, this tradition says, is fully human only if he or she is autonomous, independent from others. Not only children, the sick, and the elderly fall short of this definition, because also women as a whole. And said absolutely in this way, autonomy is wrong. Because life can never be focused exclusively on independence. As humans, we live in relations, in reciprocities, in mutual care relations. We are dependent on and from each other. And some people in power do not recognize and acknowledge this. They feel autonomous, independent because they can buy, hire, or use whatever they need. But they were born once and cared for, and they did not produce the glass of the windows in their corner offices. And it's Katrina McEntee and Natalie Stolliar that have more than 20 years ago thought about and written on relational autonomy. That means human beings, and of course this has its root in feminism, are never isolated blocks and living a full life they do not want to be. Nobody can survive without others. And others make life possible for us, not only with feeding and cleaning, but also with caring for nature, the environment, and democracies. Relational autonomy means I do not have to give up myself because I'm in a relation, in relations, in caring relations. But I need to redefine my freedom, not as freedom from others, but with others. So the image of the strong man who needs nobody else is not only a sad image, but it's also fake and false.
And could we say, I'm adding a small question, which I hope you can shortly answer with yes or no, which I know is a crazy request, but let's try this. So could we actually say that the lack of politics of care and communities of care is because of the patriarchal understanding of autonomy and not relational understanding of autonomy?
Yes. Yes. And we can't live without care,
Of course.
without giving care and receiving care, both.
I couldn't agree more. So when I said that we have talked on this conference, the occasion was the peace conference. And since you mentioned the question of women autonomy when it comes to deciding of having birth, etc., it's connected also to the question of women's bodies. So I will go on that because, as I said, you held a lecture on instrumentalization of women's bodies and gender questions as the foundation of building a more just society, maybe a society with more relational autonomy. So you then said that we inscribed values into women's bodies and demand that these values be visible on women's bodies. How does that work, and what are the repercussions?
This is a difficult question, and actually, I have a question for you here because I know you talked about motherhood, and isolation, and my question concerning women's body is: how do we talk to our daughters? How do we talk to our daughters? Tell them that their bodies are beautiful, they should enjoy them, be proud of them, love them. And how do we do this in a medialized society with idealized images and in a patriarchal society where women's bodies are used and abused? So, Lana, how do we this is a very big and very sincere question. How do we talk to our daughters?
I don't know. It's like, as you said, we teach them yeah, you're beautiful the way you are, etc. But then they go into the real world, and the real world tells them something completely opposite. So it's like living in as a woman, it's like living in this cognitive dissonance all the
Yes.
time. And
Yes.
like, okay, I can tell my daughter this, but the world doesn't tell her that. And what's happening then? So I'm not sure. I do talk with my daughter. I am trying to build her confidence, so to say, but I am also very much aware that the society is raising my daughter as well. We
Yes.
know that when she grows a bit older, when she's 11, 12, 13, 14, her peers will be more influential than me. The media, the digital platforms, social media will be more influential than me. So this is a concern for me, and also one of the reasons for my activism, because I have the need to help change these structures in which we live. So the messages that we say to young girls, be yourself, you're beautiful the way you are, do not come as crazy thoughts in a world that tells you completely something
Different.
completely different,
Yeah.
that tells you that your body is not yours.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly the point. And I'm so grateful for your activism because I think we all need to unlearn things. Also, we mothers need to unlearn things. We need to unlearn that our bodies have to fit to certain images and ideals. And this is easier said than done for us. Also because Christian traditions have their own problematic impact on women's bodies. Questions of purity and chastity have dominated these discourses over centuries. In the Catholic tradition, with the image of Mary, the mother, that's at the same time pure and chaste and a mother. And so it's just an unreachable ideal for them and for women, and women must fail here. And I myself I'm very moved by another story. It's another Mary in the Catholic history of piety. Her name is Maria Goretti. She has been canonized, that means made a saint in 1950. And the motto for her sainthood was better death than sin. And Maria Goretti was 11 years old when she was raped, had defended herself, and the rapist had killed her, 11 years old. And the sin the Catholic Church talks about, that is worse than death, is a sin against the purity code for women. And this, there was a big canonizing ceremony in 1950, and I am still wondering about the impact on millions of women who had been raped in the course of World War II and somehow survived it. We only can imagine. And so what we need to do is remove women's bodies from the standardized logic of purity, which is also often connected to thinness, to the standardized image of perfection, flawlessness, youth, and so on, to value diversity. And how do we do this? We can't put the burden of it, the burden to change things on our daughters or on people whose bodies are more offensively non-standardized than our bodies. So we can't put it on our daughters. We need to start creating spaces, I think, where values are inscribed in and on every body, spaces that might grow into communities and maybe one day into societies where our daughters can live.
I think it's important that you mentioned Mary, the Mother of God, as she has been portrayed, and this is something you also talked about and wrote about. She's been this ideal of purity that is impossible for us normal women. And then on the other side, we have Eve, who is not that perfect. By that, she is as some of the patristic fathers said, the gate of hell. So
Yeah.
we're not going into this way of perfection that is impossible. You're basically, we say it in these parts of the Balkans, guilty for being alive.
Yes.
And I think this guilt and shame as well as part of this purity culture and everything is a tool in controlling women's sexuality, women's bodies, and women's lives. And while you were talking about shame, etc., what came to me is the case of Giselle Pellicot.
Yes.
Which I find to be so important. I think this woman is the heroine of our times because she stepped out and what she said and made the world really say out loud is we need to put the shame from the victims to the perpetrators. And this is the case you were talking with a girl that was canonized, etc.
Yeah.
The shame was on her instead of the rapist.
Yeah. 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 And the guilt to be alive. This sounds like an original sin, and I guess we need to rage against this.
I couldn't agree more. But these are the questions that are related to the question of gender, of course, and the gender as a category of analysis did actually make it possible for us to analyze the discourses, the culture we live in, and to see these relations that built this culture of, even culture of violence, I would say. So you also talk and write about this, that gender is a category of analysis, but you also say it is a category of justice.
Yes. Yes, because it's not so much about identity discourses. It's about who has the right to live a full life. And that's the leading questions of gender studies. And we need to follow this up. As such, gender studies are, of course, talking about diversity and genders, but they are also talking about living with diversity. So that means questions of migration is also part of gender studies.
When we talk about gender studies, well, we have a lot of knowledge in that field, which is still not, I think, understood well in the wider audience, which makes it easy to manipulate and to weaponize.
Yes.
And, for me, the question of gender justice, not just gender justice, all social justice, but we're talking about gender justice, is a question of democracy, actually. And we've been telling that for years. And I think it has been quite clear in the last few years when we see ultra-conservative movements or Christian nationalist movements who actually weaponize the question of gender, making a tool of analysis an ideology, which is impossible to be. And it's all in their broader agenda to undermine democracies.
Yes, yes, and we see this at the moment, and in the US and other places, that there is an attempt to change a diverse democratic society into a Christian nation, and Christian nation means something special. You can't do this without women, of course, but you need to clearly define their place. First and foremost, as mothers of as many kids as possible, white kids, of course, to counter the fear that the white and superior race is replaced by migration and inferior races. This all plays in, and this is often connected with some somewhat militant anti-abortion movement, natalist movements, and equally militant ideas of something like natural masculinity. That means men's nature gives them leadership, dominance, and autonomy. And I think I'm thinking about this because it disturbs me so much. There are political and psychological mechanisms intertwined here. A grab of power of a certain group within society on the one side, and creating a clear and unquestionable and seemingly natural and eternal order on the other side. And that means getting rid of the disorder and chaos of modernity. So there are people, one pastor, Doug Wilson, that say, of course, women shouldn't vote because it's the head of the house that votes. And if anybody has the tiniest idea what Christianity is about, what the gospel tells us about Jesus, and here we can hear justice, nonviolence, mercy, compassion. If anybody has the tiniest idea about this, they need to reject this. And as we were talking about shame, I think Jesus would be deeply ashamed.
Turn the tables. He would, I often imagine how he would come and turn the tables.
Yes, 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 yes.
This is how I'm sorry, this is how I justify my rage sometimes,
Yes.
which is often pushing me actually. But when you were talking about this, I think it's so important that you connected it with the question of migrant people, with the question of race, because feminist theology as feminism, in my understanding, cannot be but intersectional. And
Yes.
I think this idea of autonomy and relational autonomy that is implied for our living can also be implied in the theories that we develop, understanding intersectionality as actually relational autonomy. Yes, gender studies stand for themselves, but they don't stand alone because they are in relation with race, with class, and with all the other statuses that we have and experiences that we have. We are going closer to the end of this conversation, unfortunately, and I cannot grasp one of the questions that have been in focus of your work lately, which I find to be crucial for our futures and which is still not in the center of our discussions and should be. And it is the field of ethic and digitalization, artificial intelligence, and data security. You have been working this area from the ethics of digital life, digitalized cultural and religion practices, to again gender bias incorporated into the sphere of digital reality and even feminist data protection. Why do we need feminist data protection?
Because we have a justice gap in all the digital systems, where women and minorities are not represented in the structures, not in the data. And until recently, I didn't know that the virtual assistant designed by Apple that tells you the news, the temperature, books your train tickets, plays your favorite music, and it's called Siri. And what I didn't know is that Siri in Norwegian means beautiful woman that guides you to victory. Isn't that great? Of course, this is a default setting and it's changeable. But as a default setting, this reveals a mindset where women are still assistants and secretaries guiding you to victory. And as such, kind, sweet, beautiful, helpful, ever patient, and they can be turned off. And maybe just one example about a justice gap and how systems are prone to discrimination. We all know about face recognition that doesn't work on darker skin, and that means if we look for one black face, all people with black faces are suspicious. But there are systems used in different European countries to automize the prevention of child neglect or child abuse. And here, poor parents are oversampled. More data exists about them than about rich parents because there have been applications for social security, application for help, visitation, police data if you live in a certain area, and so on. And thus, poor children are over-targeted. Automatized welfare models thus take these data, and what result of this is the danger, a colleague says, to confuse parenting while poor with poor parenting. Because there's extra scrutiny on poor parents, and AI welfare systems work with these numbers. The result, poverty is seen as neglect and not as poverty with dire consequences. And I think this whole field of digitalization and artificial intelligence needs to learn from gender studies, from a focus on diversity and justice.
Anti-colonial studies, etc., etc.
Yes, 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 yes.
Absolutely. Because my idea when you're talking about this is like, okay, the reality that we live in, the patriarchal structures, we kind of transfer them into the digital era. What are the repercussions? Because of that, does that mean that this digital arena can become a new tool for again shutting our mouths, shutting the mouth of women, shutting the mouth of poor people, of people of color, etc., etc. And is this a realistic concern?
I think so, because we have not only the structural problem that we have too few women in the field, but we also have a representation problem. That means that women and minorities are not represented in data, or they are underrepresented or misrepresented. And this is, let's say, a societal and a political problem you described just now, but it's also a clear a practical problem. For example, heart attacks are in women not as easily detected as in men, up to a point where doctors until recently thought heart attacks were a male disease because poor men work so much. And the overwhelming amount of data come from male patients.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we digitize medicine, we do have a problem.
Mm-hmm. You inspired me to comment just a bit, but go back to vulnerability, dignity, and autonomy and relational autonomy. I have this idea when you talked about how poor parents are it's not poor parents who are living in poverty are understood as poor parents in the term of the quality of them being parents. And this also takes me back to relational autonomy when it comes to our society, which I think that we put responsibility for being poor on the parents, and this is the responsibility of our society. And if we would understand autonomy as relational, then we would understand poor people as a problem of society and not of these people.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But this is how I will go back to relational autonomy. And to close this conversation that honestly I could have for hours with you, because I think these topics are so important for where we are today and where we're going in the future. But we do have a time limit, so I will close with, I hope, a bit more optimistic note. When we talked it was 2018, and I asked you, why do you do what you do? And you said, because it's fun. If not fun, it's not boring. And because you want to achieve justice and possibilities for children and young people. So is it still fun, considering the times and everything
Yeah.
that happened in these 7 years, and a lot have happened?
Yeah.
And have the events in the last couple of years bring the shadow of fear or concern over the joy?
Next to the joy, I would say. If I hear fun today, it sounds somewhat superficial. Yeah, because as you say, the world has changed. We see so much more political pressure, financial pressure, the rise and strengthening of right-wing parties, wars that have this gender focus or components, be it in Nigeria or in Ukraine. And we see aggressive politics against feminism and gender studies, combined with politics against migration and migrants. And what connects all of this is the them who are not us, against us. And so the climate is getting harsher, also with physical attacks against queer and trans people. And so we are fighting. We are fighting. We need to fight. And so gender studies and theological gender studies, ethical gender studies is not all puppies and roses. No, but still, I think the joy part is still there, um, especially in working with and learning from people, in learning new ideas, in putting important things on the table. And you and I, we have the huge privilege not to separate this work from our lives, our politics, and our relationships. And I always hear Angela Davis, who once said that our politics and beliefs do not grow out of our identities, but the other way around. Our identities grow out of our politics and beliefs. So it's so good to talk to you, and indirectly to all those who listen to us. So we need to care. We need to fight. We also need to regain those places and times where we can be not careless but carefree, for a while and enjoy being alive. And this is what I wish you, Lana, now, and everybody who's listening to us.
Thank you. I cannot say but wish the same to you and all the ones who are watching or listening to us. And not to forget that we do need also to hope that we can one day live as brothers and sisters in Christ, or for those who do not believe, brothers and sisters in our vulnerability.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Regina, and hope we will have the opportunity to talk again.
Yeah. All the best for you, Lana.